Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. Black babies in America are more than twice as likely as white babies to die at birth or in the first year of life. Black Americans in every age group under 65 have significantly higher death rates than whites. Black life expectancy at birth is several years lower than that of whites. And whites with only a high school education live longer than blacks with a college degree. As my guest has put it in a compelling and important new book, African Americans live sicker and die quicker than other Americans. And because of this, incredibly, tragically, tens of thousands of years of Black American lives are lost, never come to fruition each year. My guest is Linda Villarosa, a professor here at the City University of New York and one of the foremost journalists of our time. Her book is Under the Skin: The Hidden Toll of Racism on American Lives and on the Health of Our Nation. Linda, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Good to see you.
So this is a great book. I mean, I urge viewers to read this book. It's extraordinary, and it obviously took an enormous amount of work. What prompted you to take on this project?
Well, I think it first started, first started germinating on it when I went to Jackson, Mississippi in 2017. I was reporting on HIV/AIDS, and it was my first major story for the Times Magazine. And I knew that that area had the highest infection rate of HIV and also a really high death rate. So I was like, why is it in this city? And I thought it's because there's so many people who are impoverished, lack education, and lack access to health care. And then when I went there and started talking to the people on the ground, I realized, well, a lot of these people know how to prevent HIV. They are educated. Some of the young people were in college. There wasn't a lack of access to health care. There was an amazing clinic and one of the foremost HIV doctors there. What I did find out was it wasn't that. It was more about Jackson, Mississippi as a place. It was a place that didn't have good transportation, so it was hard for people, if they could get to a job, to go to it, to get to the clinic. And there was a lack of infrastructure, which was different from what I thought originally.
So one of the things that you do, and one of the things that helps make your books so compelling, is that woven into all the important information are these stories, these compelling stories of real people, the real lives of real people, sometimes the tragic deaths of real people. And one of the stories that you tell in this book tells the story of how the medical profession has historically viewed Black Americans and Black bodies. And that's the story of two sisters. They are Mary Alice and Minnie Lee Ralph. Talk about their story and talking about how you place their story in the context of your overall themes.
Well, I think working on the 1619 Project took me back in time to a time when Black people were enslaved. Then they were treated really badly by this medical system and scientists because of mythology around us, stereotypes. And then after enslavement was over, especially in the South, many of these myths have persisted. And that's what happened with the Ralph sisters. Their family came to Montgomery, Alabama in the 70s, in the early 70s, from the country. And they were really poor. They were on the tail end of the Great Migration. What they did was they were connected to the system, all the systems, housing, sort of money, and healthcare. When the two young girls, who were 12 and 14, got connected to the public health system, there was the idea that Black people shouldn't be having any more babies, especially poor Black people. So they sterilized these two young girls.
This is a policy decision.
It was a policy decision. It was in a public health clinic. They were sterilized without their parents' consent and without their own knowledge. And what I did was I thought of them because they had a case with the Southern Poverty Law Center, which they won. And that case made it so that anyone who was sterilized, you had to have informed consent. So then I thought, what happened to them, these two young girls?
Right.
So I went to Montgomery. I basically did detective work and found them. They're in their 60s and living in public housing in Montgomery. And they didn't really understand how their sacrifice changed really the laws in America that were based on this old racist idea that black people were promiscuous and weren't able to take care of children.
And we shouldn't make the mistake of believing that these were isolated instances, these sterilizations, for example. It was a problem, a big problem that lasted for a long time, didn't it?
And also, I think when that case came, the Ralph sisters case came out, you found out that 100,000 or more, mostly black women, mostly in the South, had also been sterilized. So it was widespread, and it was over years. They made a history-making sacrifice. I'm actually going to see them in a couple of weeks.
Is that right?
Yeah, a kind person read my story and gave them money to buy a house.
Wow.
So they're out of public housing. They're
That's
living in their own place. They just told me they want to get a dog.
That is so fantastic. Oh my! So they're in their 60s now?
Yeah.
Oh my! And still living together.
Still living together. Yeah. They're best friends.
The chapter 4 in your book has this title: "Something About Being Black is Bad for Your Body and Your Baby." When I saw that in the table of contents, I almost got a chill. I mean, that's a little frightening. Tell us what you meant by that. And one of the things that it leads to is the idea that you stress in the book that these are race issues that you are talking about. These are not issues of class or issues of people being undereducated and that sort of thing. So talk about that chapter a little bit.
I was really careful with that idea to say, not to make the same mistake I made in my early reporting, to assume that poor black health outcomes were about poverty only, right, or about lack of education. And that chapter speaks about weathering, the term weathering, and that looks at the idea coined by Arlene Geronimus of the University of Michigan that says just trying to survive as a marginalized or oppressed person, mostly those of us who are black, creates a kind of toxic stress that leads to premature aging. And I'm really fascinated by that idea because it's something that hasn't been well explored, but it came out especially during the pandemic when you saw the demographic of black people getting worse health COVID outcomes earlier as a demographic. So if white people had the worst outcomes, including death, between 70 and 80, ours was between 60 and 70, or even younger. So then that idea of a kind of accelerated aging that comes from just living in America as an oppressed person made sense.
So when you talk about something about being black is bad for your body and your baby, you were talking about African American women who were giving birth to, in some cases, low-weight babies. In some cases, I imagine, the babies died. But can you discuss that a little bit, that these are women who should not have been having trouble in their pregnancies?
No, and if you look at the statistics, a black birthing person with a college degree or even an advanced degree, so an advanced degree is a master's, a JD, an MD, a PhD, right, is more likely to die or almost die related to pregnancy and childbirth than a white woman with an 8th grade education.
Wow.
And the gap is wider at the more educated end. So in other words, shouldn't education be a proxy for having a better doctor, for having better health, for having the money to take care of yourself during pregnancy and for affording good health care? But it doesn't work. In fact, it's worse for the racial gap is worse for the more educated people when the only thing different is race.
That is really bizarre. I mean, it's so counterintuitive. You would think the better educated person obviously would have the better outcome.
But not if you're thinking about the idea of weathering or the idea
exactly.
that these ideas that say this isn't about class only, it's also about race in and of itself.
Right. The environments, you tackle this issue about the environment that people grow up in this case, we're talking about African Americans and their health outcomes. The health outcomes are affected, in most cases negatively, by the environments in which these folks live and work and play and just try to survive in some cases. You focus on 2 communities, one in Chicago, where your family has pretty deep roots, and then also in North Carolina. Talk a little bit about the environment.
I looked at the statistics, and black people are 75% more likely to live near a polluting facility, whether it's a landfill or a refinery or something like that. So right away, that speaks to bad air. And that is a problem with your health outcomes. But also, if you look at the community where my family came to, they were part of the Great Migration coming from Mississippi to the south side of Chicago. The community that they landed in was Inglewood. That's where my mother grew up, where she went to school. And it has life expectancy of only age 30. So
Wow.
people live to only age 30. 9 miles north, they live to age 90. It's the largest life expectancy gap. So I was curious, why is this place where my mother is from, where she grew up, was proud to be from,
Was it, wait, age 8, I thought it was age 60.
60, a 30-year
It's
gap.
a 30-year gap.
Yes, so age 60
versus age
age
90.
90, so a 30-year gap. But why were people living only to age 60? That's very young. And when I went there, I saw a community that had been erased. I also understood that the community had been redlined. So it meant that people coming from the South wanted to make it to a promised land. The biggest asset that you can get is to buy your own home, which you can, make money selling it or give to your children. They couldn't buy homes, but instead contract buyers came in to fill the gap. So if you bought a home on a contract in the 40s and 50s and 60s in Chicago, it meant that you paid more, your rates were higher, but you also didn't get any equity until you had paid it off totally.
You had a contract, you did not have a mortgage.
Exactly.
Right.
And then if you missed a payment, then you could lose your
Right.
home. And I remember asking my mother, how did grandfather own that home? Because I knew about these problems of redlining. She said he bought it on some kind of contract. He was always terrified of losing it.
Right.
And then communities that lack that kind of wealth, that lack that kind of those deep roots and of sort of having assets they're owned by the people in the community, that's when health slips away. And so then you see places where the education system isn't great, the healthcare system isn't good. And then once I went there, even the housing is, looked really bad. So I understood why people were only living to age 60. I'm like, oh, this community has been destroyed systematically, but not by the fault of the people that live there.
As you're reading your book and then you hear about all these different elements that play into the idea of weathering, the premature aging, the toxic stress that people go through, you begin to understand how all of these factors are coming in year after year after year, and of course they take a toll. How could they not take a toll?
That's right.
And one of the things where the toll is, I think, more obvious, but which actually gets short shrift, is mental health. Can you talk a little bit about mental health and African Americans and the way it's viewed and the resources that are available to people who are struggling?
Well, I think one of the main problems is when you think of weathering, it's not only weathering your physical body, but it's weathering your emotional self. If you're having to do this hard striving just to survive and it's often not working out, you can see where there are mental health problems among African Americans in the country. But often our mental health problems get overlooked with the assumption that we're very strong and that we're not dealing with mental health. Or our mental health looks like violence. And then instead of getting treatment and care, we get policed. And I wrote about that in the book, which, to an alarming rate, the amount of people who are policed because they're dealing with mental health issues is scary among
Right.
Black people. We also lack adequate healthcare providers, mental health care providers that look like us. So I think that's super important when you're going to deal with mental health because it's your heart, it's your soul. And it's hard to talk to someone or be treated by someone if you don't trust them.
There's also this misconception, actually there's a broad misconception that people struggling with mental health issues are violent.
Right.
But it's even more so with African Americans. And can you talk a little bit about the consequences of that?
I think the consequences are great. So that means that instead of getting treatment, we're policed and treated badly and not given care and not giving real love. I think the consequence is also that there's a lot of people that just don't seek treatment because they're afraid of getting policed or not getting treatment or being even afraid to admit it.
One of the stories that you talk about in the chapter on mental health has to do with a woman named Audrey, and is she pronounce it Brian?
Brian.
And she's a very successful Hollywood designer, and then it's a little scary the way that chapter opens up. Talk a little bit about her story.
Well, I think what happened with her is that she had her mental illness, her mental health issues had been overlooked all through her life. And so she was covering, sometimes by drinking, sometimes by just keeping it all inside. She had a very successful stylist business in Hollywood, but she was one of the few black Hollywood stylists at that level. And what she was doing was just really nervous all the time about keeping a foothold in her business in this predominantly white institution of Hollywood. And all of her mental health issues came crashing down, and she was about to end her life when, thank goodness, that she remembered, she pulled herself together and called a suicide hotline.
She was very close.
She was very close. She had a
suicide.
belt around her neck.
Just kind of very briefly talk about what happened subsequently with her.
Well, fortunately for her, she had parents who could afford rehab, so a good treatment center. So she was in several different treatment centers. By the time I talked to her, she was back home. She and I went to the same college. That's how I knew her. And she was back home, but she was going to treatment in the day. And she was, because she had dual problems. She had dealing with mental health issues and dealing with substance abuse.
Right.
But, you know, she was also trying to make a difference, because she said, I feel like it's so hard for black women sometimes to admit that we are vulnerable to this, or vulnerable at all. And so she wanted to talk about it and to talk about how she was able to get help.
To get a sense of how serious this problem is, as if we need to be nudged on it, but suicide attempts by black children and teenagers are on the increase. Do we have any sense of why that is? And in terms of suicide attempts among black people, I remember growing up and hearing, oh, black people don't commit suicide. That's something white people do, which just seemed incredibly bizarre on its face to me. So what's going on in terms of suicide, and why is it increasing among black youths?
Well, suicide has been on the uptick for young people in general, but it's been overlooked in black children. So the idea, like we were saying, like I grew up with that same myth that black people don't commit suicide. Right. But if it's been overlooked and underreported, now it's starting to build up. And you've seen this rise that has been going on for at least 20 years in suicide attempts. The other thing is suicide attempts when suicide attempts happen at the hospital level, if someone gets to the hospital, then research shows that this is often their first time being seen. Suicide is a huge cry for help. So what are the steps along the way for black children especially that have been missed? And that happens with not enough providers in our communities, in our schools, and not enough providers that look like us.
You cite a study that you actually referred to as the gold standard in your book. The study was called Unequal Treatment, Confronting Racial and Ethnic Disparities in Healthcare. Who compiled this study, and what were the findings?
This was I call it gold standard because it was a National Academy of Sciences study, so it was government-based. It was all of the best people that do racial health disparities 20 years ago. So it was first came out in 2002, and then it was published in 2003. So it's 20 years old, right, the publication this year. And it really looked at 483 other studies around racial health disparities. The one that really stuck out with me was about diabetes and amputation. So it looked at two groups, black patients and white patients, who had equal access to health care coverage and also had equal severity of diabetes. Yet black people were much more likely to get an amputation. And so I don't think medical people go into the field to hurt people, but someone's making some kind of decision in the moment to say, oh, this person should get their foot cut off or their leg cut off, this person shouldn't, and black people are more likely to have that kind of amputation.
And that gets to this whole issue, which is poo-pooed by so many, but which we know is real, about unconscious racial biases, and that these biases have real world effects. and sometimes tragic effects. Is there, what is it that you think, because this study was so vast, it looked at so many other studies, explain why that's so important?
Well, I think that people are always looking at evidence, looking for evidence to say, is there a problem of discrimination bias in the healthcare system itself, when the very motto of the system is do no harm.
Right.
And I was recently talking on a panel with a doctor here, and we were talking about this. And what they said was, if we only had more evidence. And I said, we don't need any more evidence. This is a 20-year-old study, and it found 483 problems, in the past. And now we're looking at it again at the 20th anniversary. But also, if you listen to the stories of people, you can hear. It becomes a kind of evidence that we don't need to be saying we need more of. Just listen to people. They say, I've had a hard time in the healthcare system, and I'm Black. I'm a person of color. And so I think if we listen, you hear this. But I think the evidence matters too. And there really is enough evidence. But I think listening to the people is important.
You address COVID, and COVID has just been such a profound issue over the past few years now. Talk a little bit about the discrepancy between the impact of COVID on African Americans and the impact of COVID on whites, and what do you think we should draw from those discrepancies?
I think the biggest discrepancy is now you look at life expectancy, the racial gap in life expectancy. And before COVID, it was about 3 years. So Black people lived 3 fewer years. Now it's 6 years because of COVID. And we had, especially at the beginning, there was the racial disparity was really huge as in health outcomes. So we got worse COVID, and we died more frequently of it and at younger ages. And now it's kind of evening out. But even when the vaccine first came, we were called vaccine hesitant. When I was looking at that issue, often the vaccines weren't being distributed in the communities where we were living in. Then even when they were, because of a historic and real distrust of the healthcare system, people, Black people and other people of color sometimes were hesitant to get a vaccine because they didn't trust that it was in our own best interest.
Now, these are really tough issues, and after a while, you can start to think, wow, the problems are so vast, how can we make any headway? And in some cases, we are in fact going backwards. So my question to you is, are there reasons to be optimistic, or do we need to just bury our heads in the sand?
Well, I'm super optimistic.
All
so I'm
right.
always looking, what is the good thing? And, I think one of them is a really resurgence of medical students who want to make a difference, who are much more political, who are saying, wait, I want to understand these racial health disparities in this country where I'm going to be a doctor. I don't want to be the same kind of doctor or enter a healthcare system where people are being harmed. And so I see them wanting to learn, wanting to read my book, have discussions. And I visited a lot of medical schools where I see the change happening even among medical students who have to work really hard as students are trying to change the system of education and training in medicine.
You've done extraordinary work for the New York Times Magazine. You've written books before this, and you focused on health issues, and especially health issues as they relate to African Americans. How did you become so immersed in that topic?
I think it was because my first job was at Essence Magazine, an early job, and I was doing personal health. So I was saying to, the Black women readers, oh, if you just do better, you'll be better. And then it'll lift the whole race. It'll lift our health outcomes, because there's never been a time when we had equal health outcomes. But over time, and by going to public health school, by looking at what was going on as far as health in marginalized communities, communities that have been polluted, even my own, the communities where my family's from, I started to shift my own thinking to say, it's obviously everyone should take good care of themselves. Everyone should try to do the right thing as far as personal health. But even if we work this hard as individuals without systemic change and institutional change, then we're not going to change these health outcomes. So that's how but it took time. I was at Essence in the late 80s.
Right.
And so it's taken me a while to even shift my own thinking. And I do it with, a certain amount of humbleness. And, I don't want to act like I know everything, because it took me a long time to think through these issues.
Well, it took a long time, but we're really glad that you've done it. We've been speaking with Linda Villarosa. Her book is Under the Skin, The Hidden Toll of Racism on American Lives and on the Health of Our Nation. Get it, read it, absorb it. Linda, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right.